Moves on in, and he scores! He's gonna learn today.
What's happening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Pod Street Bullies. My name is Derek.
And I'm John. What's going on, everybody?
What a week it has been, and by that I mean nothing has happened.
Yep.
Man.
Same old thing, man.
Quarantine just keeps dragging along, you know? It's just I'm trying to fill some time here.
Yesterday was nice. I don't know about where you are, but the weather was beautiful here yesterday.
It has been raining all day today. Yesterday wasn't bad.
It rained today, yeah.
Yeah, yesterday wasn't bad. It was pretty sunny. You know, I think we actually went on a walk, my wife and I, with the kid, and it was a really nice day. But today, man, I woke up in the middle of the night to feed my son, and I looked outside, and I'm like, guess I can't mow today.
Yeah, actually, I have a really good story you kind of know about, but I think people might get a laugh out of this. So
right.
It's been nicer out. And Reagan really likes looking at the birds. Reagan is my daughter. So I've been putting out a lot of bird seed, and we've been sitting out and watching them. But with bird seed attracts squirrels. So we've been getting a decent amount of squirrels recently. And I think they're starting to try to, like, build a nest in the roof. Uh-oh. So I was telling my landlord, like, listen, we might have a little bit of a squirrel problem. The seed's probably not helping things. So anyway, I don't know when this was. I think it's Thursday night. I just hear this weird noise. And I'm like, I don't know what this is. My dog clearly hears it too because she's over by the door. And I'm looking outside. Nothing. I look everywhere. I look every which way. Nothing. Next morning, Friday morning, say it's about 6:30, 7 o'clock. I hear a noise again. The dog goes over to the door. She's barking at the door. And there's a squirrel sitting on the railing.
Oh, no.
And the squirrel's looking at the mailbox, crying in the mailbox. So my mailbox is like up against the house. It's one of those black ones that, you know, you could probably just fit. It's more like lengthwise than it is widthwise.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So anyway, I kind of just tap on the mailbox and it freaking moves.
Oh, Lord.
So there was a baby squirrel in the mailbox. So I'm like, great. I told my wife, Carrie, I'm like, listen, I got to go out and do this. I don't want the squirrel to freaking jump at me, so I'm going to kind of lift open the lid with a broom. So I go lift the lid open with the broom. Doesn't come out because It's either exhausted or terrified. So I then have to, like, flip the mailbox upside down, and then it's still hanging on the bottom, this poor little thing. It was a itty-bitty little squirrel. So for like 25 minutes, I'm trying to get the freaking squirrel out of my mailbox. It's out. I think it's still alive. But could you imagine if the mail lady or mailman, depending on who happened to be there that day, went to drop in some letters?
Oh, surprise, surprise.
It would have gotten quite the tip, man.
Oh, that would have been great. I would have filmed that reaction for sure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we filmed it and sent it to my landlord, and we were like, we need a trapper here soon.
You messaged me earlier today, and you said you had another good story to tell me here, and I'm very anxiously awaiting this story.
Well, it's actually not much of a story, but I just want to talk about wrestling.
Okay, so we'll call it a topic then.
Yeah.
All right, I would love to hear this because I'm a big wrestling dork as well.
So I grew up loving wrestling. My mom hated it. She banned it from the house. So whenever I would go to sleep over at my dad's side of the family, now my dad passed away, and I would go over there about once a month, spend a Friday night, and with my uncles, we'd watch wrestling reruns, or, you know, they'd record it on the cassette tapes and things like that, and we'd fake wrestle. We'd have a blast. As I got older, I kind of steered away from it. It didn't have the same magic. You know, every once in a while I'd get into it when it got interesting, but like as of right now, I think the WWE is crap.
Oh, it's terrible without the fans. That kills it.
Well, that, and I just think I don't really love the characters either.
Nothing really grabs you, you know?
I always go off on a rant with my wife and go, you know, I hate now that every wrestler has like a real name. Like, I used to love the days when they were just like these superficial characters.
Yeah, like The Undertaker, and he's still around, but
Vader,
yeah.
Rikishi, like
Rikishi.
names that, I'm not necessarily the wrestler, but I loved that kind of, there was like a mysticism to them.
No one comes to a wrestling show to see a guy named Mike Davis wrestle. They want to see some guy called like the Punisher or,
Right, right. And now everybody has like a human name. But now that there hasn't been really any sports recently, I've been watching a lot more like old wrestling reruns, and Reagan's been watching them with me. I don't know if for better or worse. But I just started watching the AEW.
It's neat, man.
It's pretty good. I mean, it's definitely flawed. Like, you can tell there's a bunch of people still trying to work out their kinks. But I get enjoyment of that like once a week for 2-hour program more than the WWE.
The WWE is so oversaturated because when you count Raw, SmackDown, and NXT, that's 7 hours of programming every week. And it's like, how much can you really fit in that's substantial enough to hold your attention?
And when you've got to get guys like MVP back, like it's time to cut things a little bit.
Yeah, AEW's nice because it's got, like you said, those guys that are like, they were the indie darlings, and now they've got like a big name promotion that are, they're getting paid, they're doing their thing, and they're getting the exposure. And
top names are going there. I mean, Jon Moxley's, Dean Ambrose.
Yeah.
It's like everybody who gets cut by the, Chris Jericho, but everybody who gets cut by the WWE or they're unhappy, they go to the AEW. Like Luke Harper, is that his name?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Luke Harper.
Yeah.
He's over there now.
Oh, yeah. All the guys that just got released, I mean, there's rumors about them going over too. Like the Revival, they changed their name. I couldn't remember for the life of me, but, they're probably headed there because they're friends with the Young Bucks and things like that,
But the main reason why I like AEW, Jim Ross.
Good old JR. Oh, yeah.
I mean, come on now. When I found out that he was on there, I'm like, all right, this is what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah. Jericho's been doing a pretty good job on commentary, too. That guy's
he called somebody, who did it? Kenny Omega? He called him a pumpkin-headed son of a bitch.
Oh, I believe it.
And I was laughing forever. I thought it was the funniest thing.
Another name, Matt Hardy. He just jumped ship to AEW, and he's in that program with Jericho.
Yeah, but he's got to stop that whole broken or woken Matt Hardy thing. I hate that character.
I love that.
Really?
It's just unhinged.
It's so dumb.
The way
but he's got this stupid accent.
Yeah, I guess it's like a niche thing, but I thought it was funny when he flew that drone to Jericho's house and Jericho's trying to like chase down. He's like, "Come here, you son of a bitch!"
But I mean, if there's any wrestling fans out there that are a little tired of the same old thing, definitely give AEW a try. It's 2 hours a week, and it's interesting. I don't know. I mean, Cody Rhodes is like a big member of that. Dustin Rhodes, Goldust.
Oh yeah,
is there? And there's a bunch of new people too. Like, I don't know. I like it a lot more.
There's we talked about this too. If you are a wrestling fan, which I mean, both of us are, obviously you can tell. Dark Side of the Ring, the documentary series that is on Viceland, I believe, or Vice. I've been watching it on YouTube. Incredible stories. I mean, I've seen the Jimmy Superfly Snuka one, the Chris Benoit one. I just watched the one on New Jack, and I couldn't keep my eyes off the screen. That man is insane. Certifiably insane. I'm not even kidding.
Dude, I remember the Chris Benoit thing when he died, and they had this whole tribute to him, and then when they found out the details, they had to like completely retract everything.
You won't find his name in any record book right now. I mean, they completely wiped his impact on wrestling just completely out of the books. We're not going to get into the whole moral dilemma situation, but, it is insane, the reaction they initially had, and then now you look at it, there's no record of him ever in the WWE.
Right, well, that's Vince McMahon at his finest.
Of course. But we're going to cap off the wrestling talk here and get to some actual hockey because, we are a hockey podcast, really. Today we are going to be talking about a hot topic that's been circulating Twitter, the news, we're talking about the draft, and there's stories coming out. Pierre LeBrun was one of the guys that kind of, if you want to say, broke this. They're thinking about continuing with the draft being in June. Not sure if it's the original date, but I'm sure it probably is, considering that's when the draft is, in June. And John and I are going to take opposite sides here. We're going to talk about whether it's good, whether it's bad. I'm going to talk about...
Because we naturally disagree. We actually disagree on this one.
This is not a devil's advocate type of thing. This is me saying it's a terrible idea and John legitimately thinking it's a good idea. It's all spirited. It's all in good fun, but this is going to get heated. I can tell already. So, without further ado, folks, if you're in your cars, strap yourself in. If you're not, just take a seat and get ready because we're going to have some fun.
Strap yourself in anyway.
Strap on your seat belts.
Strap on.
Good one. Anyways, how do you want to do this, man? Do you want to lead off? We'll just do counterpoints. I guess, what are we going to do to open up this discussion here?
Well, first thing I want to say is the main part of this is if the season or playoffs or whatever hasn't started yet.
Yes.
Okay? Because more news has come out about possibly the season or whatever starting back up in June. But when we kind of thought about this, it was more of the hockey being played mid-July, right?
Yes.
So if hockey has not started yet, that is a big part of this. Mm-hmm. I think it is perfectly fine for the draft to happen on June 21st.
Okay.
Go ahead. I want you to throw it at me so I can go, nope, you're dumb.
Okay, I guess the biggest sticking point here for me, and maybe others, how are you going to determine the second half of the draft? So the teams that aren't in the playoffs right now, and we don't even know how they would determine the draft order regardless of what teams make the playoffs or not. But how are you going to determine the draft order if there isn't a definitive end to the season just yet?
Okay, so I've said this a few times on the show, at least I think I have, because I seem to say this in every work scenario. You have to address the abnormal with abnormal. Okay? So I think the first thing you do is you have to decide, for draft purposes, we're going to make the playoff teams the playoff teams. Now, if we're going on July 15th, I really think we're just going to cut to the postseason. I can't see us playing season games, regardless of the talk that's being said. I don't live in a candy land. I'm talking reality here. I don't see us having a regular season. So if we're going in mid-July, what you do is you go, okay, those teams are in the playoffs. The rest of them, lottery it, okay? Pinball it.
Okay.
Then you have your playoff teams. And guess what? You have a part two of the pinball.
Okay.
So you now have a new lottery. Those playoff teams, you're not going to say, oh, this team had a better record. You have lottery part two. So the first 15 picks, 16 picks, whatever the heck it is in the initial lottery, get slotted out. Then the next bit do.
Okay.
That takes away any of their, but, I didn't win the cup, but I had the best record and this isn't work and da-da-da-da-da. It's just complete lottery style. And I know that it's not traditional, but again, we're not dealing with traditional times. Get creative here.
The one thing for me, too, I think that sticks out that I actually completely agree with you on this is the separation of the playoff versus the non-playoff teams, because you cannot, it would be completely detrimental to this league. You cannot have the team that wins the Stanley Cup be eligible for the number one pick. I think that's just ridiculous.
100%. Yeah, and I'm not trying to do that, but I do think that we need to think of, if there is hockey, we're going to have a condensed offseason. If you can take a little bit of the load off of that without it being detrimental, it's the draft.
Yeah. Now, I guess let's throw out a hypothetical here. Let's say, for instance, the Flyers. They get bounced in the first round, but due to this lottery system that you're talking about with the playoff teams, they get drawn for the 31st pick.
Yep.
In my opinion, they have a case to say, listen, that's ridiculous. There's no way we should be picking last in the round because we were bounced in the first round of the playoffs.
Well, that's when I say boo effing who, man. I'm sorry, but I wanted to get hockey done, and this is how we were able to get it done this year. Like, I completely understand that, and the reality is for every situation outside, I mean, dealing with professional sports or outside of professional sports, we're going to find a counter argument. Things are going to be freaking weird, probably for the next year or so.
Oh, absolutely.
And someone who doesn't get what they want is going to have a complaint. But I'm talking about something that works for the league. And if the Flyers get the 31st pick, that freaking blows. But you know what? They also had the best chance of just an equal chance of getting this. What is it? 16th, 17th? Help me out here. 17th pick?
What do you think? 16 teams make it, so 16th, probably the 16th pick, or 15th.
Right. So they're given that same opportunity, because I feel like those, right, you don't go like they have so many pinballs, and I think you all get one. Like, make it interesting.
Yeah, just draw it right out. There's no, this team has a 13% chance of getting this pick, so we're going to put 7 ping pong balls here, and then all the other teams get, 8 or something. What, I don't know the math.
And Bettman can go, well, one year you got the 2nd overall pick, and you probably shouldn't have gotten that. So
yeah. Hey, you know what? If it's a lottery thing, I'm sure that you'll get New Jersey winning the first overall pick again, and then you'll have Edmonton winning the playoff team lottery because, it's New Jersey and Edmonton, and they always seem to win the damn lotteries. Wouldn't that be something? Imagine New Jersey winning the lottery this year again.
Dude, I saw a mock draft where if Ottawa got the 1st pick and then had the 4th pick, the two prospects that wound up on their team, I mean, they could look obviously. Yeah, and I think in this draft it was Byfield, which I don't personally see, but regardless, though, I mean, if they were picking 1 and 4, that'd be insane. I mean, we would go from making fun of this franchise to go, maybe this guy had a little bit of an idea of what he was doing.
He tanked properly. Hextall, take notes.
Yeah.
So, aside from this point, we kind of hashed that out. Let's get to the next point. What do you think makes this a good idea then?
What do I think makes it? Well, I kind of already said it. I think that, again, we're dealing with condensed time, and I've said since the beginning of all this, I want to make the NHL 2020-21 season be as regular as possible, right?
Of course.
So I think that one of the ways you can do that is by removing some of the off-season aspects that would typically happen after the playoffs and try to get them beforehand. And the only one that works is the draft. Because aside from, this idea where you have trades and all these extra things that happen in the draft, just the idea of drafting players, right?
Yep.
That can happen before the season ends.
You're right. Now, let me hit you with a hypothetical here again. Baseball?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
In baseball, don't they draft at some point in the middle of the season? Or am I making that up?
I think you're right. It's during the season in some capacity. I'm not a huge baseball fan because, let's be honest, both our teams are in the crapper right now.
Crap.
But I'm going to hit you with another hypothetical here real quick. Let's talk about trades. So the draft day has notoriously been a busy day for trades. You have teams that trade picks, unloading salaries of players that they just won't be able to fit under the cap given the circumstances. And I'd like to touch on the cap down the road here in a second. But how do you go about making trades while there's still a looming season left to play? And not season, but you could say just playoffs. How do you go about that? Are you going to just tell the playoff teams, no, you can't make any trades, but everybody else can? Because that's not fair to me.
So, yeah, I think this is where, you have to be really creative. I do think that you cannot trade pending UFAs. So, let's say Arizona is completely out of the playoffs, right? They couldn't trade Taylor Hall.
Yeah.
To a playoff team for extra draft picks. I think they're completely scrapped.
Okay.
Right? Now, it comes interesting where it's like you want to trade a guy who has term left on his contract.
Okay.
And you're a playoff team. I don't necessarily know the answer to that. I'd like it in a perfect world. I'd like to say these trades take place after the postseason, but imagine Jake Voracek being traded but he's also going to play the playoffs with the Flyers.
Yeah.
Like, I do think it's a little interesting, but I also think, again, you're dealing with an abnormal situation. So you can say you can trade anybody with term. But Philadelphia, if you trade Voracek, and I'm not saying they should or they would, but if you trade Voracek or you trade Gostisbehere, then you're not going to have them for the postseason.
So then let's say – I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, because I could just keep talking.
So let's say then Voracek does get traded. Hypothetically,
Yep.
he gets traded to, let's say, Boston. Boston's in the playoffs as well. It's a player-for-player trade, and, just throwing it out there, maybe it's Torrey Krug. Torrey Krug for Jake Voracek, 1-for-1. Doubt that would ever happen, but regardless. So Torrey Krug is not eligible.
Is he a UFA, though?
I'm not sure. He actually is. Yeah, I don't...
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he is.
Either that or they might have just re-signed him. I can't. Again, I'm not Mark Allred here, but they disqualify them for the playoffs then. So then there's no incentive to trade anybody at that point because you want all your guys for the playoffs.
Well, what do you mean by disqualify them for the playoffs?
Like the player, it's the player himself. Like if you trade somebody, let's say the Voracek for Krug trade, the Bruins can't play Krug because he's been traded. Is that what you're saying?
No. So what I'm saying is, okay, so I think that there's two options here, right?
Okay.
I think one of them is option one would be you trade somebody, but it's after the whole season is done. So say if Jake Voracek gets traded, okay, traded to Boston, but that trade isn't active until the Stanley Cup is risen.
So if they trade Voracek, but they get a pick in return, do the Flyers still make that pick but keep Voracek's services until the end of the playoffs?
Well, so now that's where I was going to say I don't really like that option.
Okay.
The second option would be you can trade anybody who's not a pending UFA. That player goes right then and there, and that's a risk you're just going to have to take. So some people wouldn't take that risk. And guess what? They could also trade them during free agency time.
Of course.
They could still, if you're going to player-for-player trade, it's still possible. But if the Flyers, for some reason, felt like they couldn't go deep into the postseason, and they're like, you know what, we're going to get 2 first-round picks. Again, completely making this up for Jake Voracek. We're going to get 2 first-round picks. Let's do it. Then they take that risk.
Okay.
And again, it's not normal, and there's added risk to it. But I do think it would make things really effing interesting.
Oh, absolutely, it would make things interesting. I mean, but think about the player's psyche. Like, you're Jake Voracek right now.
Yep.
You're told that, hey, you've been traded. This is what you've been traded for. Imagine thinking, like, that's all that they got for me, and I still have to play the playoffs right now for this team that just traded me. Like, that, it just doesn't seem like there's much incentive to these playoff teams making trades at the draft.
You're right. And there'd probably be less of them.
Yeah. And like you said, it's abnormal, and that's fine. You're going to have to kind of adopt a little bit of abnormalities during this offseason because of what's going on. But in order to try to keep things as normal as possible, and I say that knowing full well that it's just not going to be completely run-of-the-mill normal, you want to try to make it as normal as possible. That sounds ridiculous right now, but...
You're right, but when things get strange, conservative behavior happens, right? When something that you're not used to in life takes place, typically our initial reaction is to take a step back.
Of course.
So regardless if the draft were to happen, if it was to happen in June or if it were to happen in October,
yeah,
it's going to feel weird. It's going to be rushed if it's not in October, which is also going to prevent people from making those well thought out deals. Because if you look at a team like the Flyers, they're going to have less time to prepare for the draft at that point in time.
You're right.
So I think regardless, those playoff teams are not going to be as active in the trade market anyway.
You're right. I think you're right. I mean, because the only type of deal that these types of teams make that are in the playoffs are usually salary cap dumps.
Right.
Last year you saw that with JT Miller being traded from Tampa to Vancouver. You see it every year. It never fails.
Right. I wouldn't see a playoff team really trading an asset. Like, but also think about it too. Like, if you're a team like the Flyers, right? Unless you're dumping somebody, say Gostisbehere. I mean, I wouldn't even say Jake Voracek is a guy right now who you would just salary dump at this point. I mean, he's been playing quite well the last time they played hockey. So most playoff teams aren't going to trade roster players. You almost get like a trade deadline part 2, where some people might be like, hey, you know what? We'll give you this guy for an extra first rounder. But again, the caveat is he can't be a pending UFA.
Yeah. And I think that's the big, like you said, it's a caveat, because if he's a pending UFA, it's like that's kind of the deal breaker there. You're like, why would you do that in these circumstances? Which leads me, I guess, what you were saying earlier, leads me to my next point here with the draft itself and the fact that a team's finish to the season, whether it be at the end of the regular season or when their team is eliminated from the playoffs or wins the Stanley Cup, their approach to the draft is typically altered by the end of the season. So you're Chuck Fletcher, you're watching the first round of the playoffs, and you're noticing that Michael Raffl really isn't doing well. And he's not just doing well, he's not just not doing well, he's doing terribly. So you're thinking, going into the draft, maybe I can pick somebody up that could be his successor. Without that, you don't have that time to decide. You don't get to see the playoff performances, and it doesn't weigh as heavily as the rest of his career. We know the type of player we have in Michael Raffl. But what I'm, I guess, trying to say and encapsulate here is that this type of move could really alter the approach to the draft, and not just the draft, but the free agency as well. For some of these execs, some of these GMs and head coaches, some of these guys might not even be on contract by then because it runs out in the summer.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the free agency is a whole different bag of beans. I mean, I don't think that could happen until playoffs are over. But I would make the argument that a player's successor, immediate successor, is someone within the organization already. Mm-hmm. So someone like Raffl, you might look at a guy like Lashinsky. Okay, you might look at a guy like Wade Allison.
Okay.
Those are the guys who would be the replacement before somebody who gets drafted, most likely, because very rarely in the grand scheme of things do players go from being drafted to the pros.
Oh, you're right. But I'm saying is you think about it when you encapsulate it all and you say Raffl's not playing well, we need somebody to, replace him. You're not going to be able to draft that guy. Like you said, it typically doesn't come from the draft right away. And even a guy like Allison or Lashinsky, we know their skill set, we know they're great players, but is that going to translate to the NHL level? Or are you going to go out in free agency and look for a guy that you can sign to a 1 to 2 year deal to have that buffer period to get those guys acclimated to the game in the NHL, and the professionals, I should say? Because, maybe they don't trust these guys enough to slot in for a guy like Raffl.
Yeah, I guess just the way I think about the draft, the GMs have a little bit more of a long-term view of where their needs are going to be, right? And I don't think anybody's going to go into the draft and go, we need bottom 6 help.
You're right.
Those guys end up being kind of developed into those players, and typically they're your middle to late round draft picks. But I think that they could still go into the draft going, hey, you know what? We need to do our best to pick up a scorer. Or, I'm still not confident in our prospect blue line. We need to get a defenseman at all costs. I still think that they can make those assessments and evaluations. And that every GM, since we've been on this quarantine, has been on the phone with their scouts daily.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they must know that that's a possibility. So they're going to be as prepared as they can be for this draft.
Yeah. Now, flip side to this. Let's talk again, because, really, this is all a hypothetical. Alexis Lafreniere is going to be the number 1 pick in the draft. We know that.
Yep.
So let's just say whoever, I don't care who picks first, they get him. Second pick, let's say that they are looking at Byfield.
Yep.
Byfield is a forward.
Yep.
That team needs to address that need. But They also know that upcoming in free agency, there's a proven scoring forward that would bring them immediate help.
It's different though, man.
But does
You're
it
talking
alter
about
their approach to the draft?
Apples and oranges. No, because your draft is your long-term fixes, and
But
your
some of
free
these guys are
agency-
going to play next season.
You're right. But like, if you're going to draft a guy like Byfield, okay, and your hope is that he's going to be on the main roster, right?
Of course.
Most likely, you're a rebuilding team.
Yeah.
Most rebuilding teams aren't going to throw a ton of money at somebody who's 28, 29, 30 years old.
Well, New York just did it this past year with Panarin and Trouba.
New York is different.
Just
Would
tell
you
me
like
I'm
to know
right.
why New York is different?
Because they suck. I hate them.
Because it doesn't fit the mold to my argument right now. Okay.
Of course, just admit that I had a point right there.
No, that was a good point. But
Thank you.
honestly, I just don't see that changing anything. I do think it's two separate things, especially the way that free agency is these days. Like, the guys who are going out and signing free agents, in my mind, for the most part, are not the guys who are picking first, second, third, unless you're like Colorado, who ended up getting Ottawa's pick, you know?
Yeah, there's extenuating circumstances in every type of move like that, and to your point, that's correct,
Right. And if you can go ahead and you draft Byfield, but then you get somebody in free agency who for 2-3 years can kind of fill the void while he develops. Well, you deserve GM of the year, my friend. Good job. Like, you're doing your job well. I don't think that we should not do this because we're afraid of general managers being smart about it. Like, this is an opportunity for them to really challenge themselves and to see what they can do.
Absolutely. Now, to that point as well, if we're talking draft, let's talk about the combine. In your opinion, and I'm not going to really argue one way or another right now at least, how important is it for scouts, GMs, coaches to have that evaluation time period, to be able to see these kids, check out their specs, make sure that everything looks good? This guy had surgery a few months ago. Let's check to see if everything's okay. Is that more important and should be essential to the process, or is it the fact that the scouts have already done their job, watch these guys play throughout the season? Are you going to put enough stock into the combine to alter your approach and say we shouldn't have the draft while the season is still happening, you could say?
So this is my own personal opinion and thought on the combine. I view the combine as more of an icing on the cake. I don't think that scouts use it as a make or break for anybody. I don't think that they go at the combine and by the end of it go, you know what, this guy's completely changed my mind. There's not like one session in a combine isn't going to change what scouts have been viewing all season, the season prior, So if it's medically proven to have the combine, great. Why not? But if it's not, I really don't think it's going to change much.
It's a pony show. It's a dog and pony
Right.
show. They're trotting them out there to say, hey, here's our highly touted prospects,
Right. I mean, it's not like, and I'm going to completely make up all this, but it's not like Clinton Byfield is going to go to the combine and all of a sudden he's not going to be able to bench press, 105 pounds that day. And I'm actually sure they'd probably be a little concerned, but if he can't bench, and they're going to go, oh, this guy's not worth it anymore.
Off the board.
Yeah. So I really just think that the combine is a little bit more of a luxury than we say it is. I mean, than we originally view it as.
You're right.
That makes sense.
No, absolutely makes sense. I think that, like I said earlier, it's kind of the trick show. It's, hey, here are the guys that are going to get drafted in the first round. Here's the 3 guys that are the unanimous 1, 2, 3 picks, whatever. Whether they post a subpar or phenomenal combine, it's like their status is already solidified in the minds of many of the GMs.
And even if you're looking at speed, right? It's one thing to skate really fast on your own, but what can you do, when there's other players on the ice? Like, that's the important part.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you could skate circles around the rink and be the fastest guy out there, but if you can't do that with the puck on your tape and around other players, I'm not sold,
Like, I don't know if the NBA has a combine, but I always made this joke where it's like I was somebody who would be made for the NBA combine, because you give me a basketball on a basketball court with nobody else guarding me, and 8 times out of 10, I will drain that shot regardless of where it is within reason.
I said that about the NFL. When there's no corners covering a receiver, I can hit the receiver 10 out of 10 times.
Yeah. It's all well and good, but then you make me have to dribble or like catch a pass cleanly and then shoot. But in no way.
That's when John Gove slides down the draft boards.
Right. So like, you're not going to judge somebody just based off of what they can do independently anyway. Oh, I think we spent too much time talking about the combine, going into how I have a wicked, wide open jump shot.
I think you're right, and I'll believe it when I see it, and I haven't seen it yet. But to get to the next point here, and this is kind of just a smaller point, I wanted to touch on the conditional picks. So there are a number of conditional picks in this draft. Not many have much of a bearing on I don't even know what to say right now, because right now the only pick that matters is the pick that the Caps dealt, and the condition is it turns into a first-round pick if they win the Stanley Cup. So, Ottawa and the Islanders in the Pajot trade, there are conditional picks, but it's all about whether a team makes the playoffs or not, makes it to this round, that round. If we're establishing who the playoff teams are and there is a playoff, those conditions it's a moot point right now for us to discuss. But because there is one pick that still is kind of wide open, I think that it's worth discussing because, if we don't have a playoffs this year, but we still have a draft, how are they going to decide what happens with that pick that the Caps dealt?
I think that this is something that would have to come to a team vote. I mean, as far as like the owners and general managers would have to fill out a ballot or a vote to send to Gary Bettman with various options, because I think that the league would have to come to a consensus on this. I think that the easiest answer, and I don't really have a great answer, the easiest answer is to just bump it all up. Okay. Like change those conditions for the next season. Okay. So I know it's not ideal.
Okay, so Washington keeps that pick this year, but next year that's the conditional pick.
I guess. Yeah, this is the one thing that I really just don't have a great answer for. I think that the best thing that the NHL would really have to do is just lay out a few options and then let the NHL owners vote on it.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, like, what is the condition with the Capitals? Is it if they
win the Stanley Cup Finals, if they win the Stanley Cup, that pick turns into a first-round pick, which would be the last pick. Without the lottery system that you discussed earlier, it would be the last pick in the draft. Right. But let's say, just for craps and gigs here, the Caps get lucky and they're the first playoff team in the draft. They get the first pick out of the playoff teams. So they're picking 16th, let's say. Is that kind of unfair that they're looking at that and saying, well, now this team that the Caps traded this pick to, they're getting this pick, and it's all within the top, 20. I mean,
yeah. I don't know. I mean, and that's the thing, right? We're trying to address something that we weren't really prepared for. And I do think that there are a few options to this. Like, okay, so instead of it being a first, maybe it can be a second and a sixth. I know that's not ideal, but like maybe that's one of the options. It could be a late round pick. Mm-hmm. It has to be fifth or sixth, so it's not the seventh. Something like that. Or moving it to next year.
Okay.
Or going up. Sorry, scrapped all conditional picks. It's just what This is what you originally traded for. Nanny, nanny, boo, boo.
Okay. Now I'm trying to look. I'm just really not into looking for the actual pick itself. But regardless, I think you're right. It might be best to just push that to the next year and say, okay, this is the condition for next year instead. Because like you said, Abnormal circumstances call for abnormal solutions. It always makes me think of the Chappelle Show episode. It's like, modern problems require modern solutions.
Oh man!
All right, so
the Chappelle Show. I loved that show.
That man is a comedic genius.
Would that even be able to be played in this day and age?
They play reruns. I mean,
do they?
Yeah. Well, you think about it too. The Office. There's some stuff on there that you're like, man, to this day and age, if this was a series happening now.
You know what I was just watching? Going back to the wrestling talk when DX pretended to be the Nation of Domination.
Ooh, boy.
That would fly.
No, sir.
my wife was looking at that and going, What does he have on his face? I was like, nah, don't worry about it.
Not important. Just stop. Stop it now. Well, I guess the only other thing that I wanted to touch on in accordance with this discussion here was the salary cap. We kind of hinted towards it earlier where I said I wanted to touch on this, but my thing with this is there's been reports about this salary cap staying flat coming next year at $81.5 million. There's been reports about it being drastically cut. You said, in an episode a couple weeks ago, I believe, that it could be cut by, 20 to anywhere to 40%, which is
if there was no playoffs.
If there were no playoffs, of course. That's one hell of a drop. I mean, 40% from 81, you're putting it at about 50-something million dollars, if my math is somewhat correct here. With that alters a lot of people's approaches here, because you see the teams that have that approach in free agency. I need this guy, this guy, this guy. Is that going to make for a flurry of teams trying to get up to the top 5 in this draft to see if they can get the cheaper option? Like, okay, I need a forward. Maybe I can grab Marco Rossi. Maybe I can grab him, and he might be pro ready. But what am I going to have to give up to get him? Is that going to affect an approach to the draft for some of these teams that are really strapped with in regards to the cap?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a lot of things here. If we go to a drastic drop, right? I mean, you're going to have to – it doesn't matter what you do at the draft. There's going to be teams that are going to need to find ways to cut things. The NHL is going to have to alter how they approach the offseason if there's a drastic cut to the cap.
Yes.
I've been doing so well speaking, I've lost it.
You're doing fantastic, John. Keep going.
But I don't know. I mean, I think regardless of when this draft is, you're going to see that there will be fewer trades anyway. I just think that this year it's going to be less trades. Teams are going to be like, okay, so we just ended the playoffs. I got a draft on Tuesday. Free agency starts on Saturday. I have no idea what I'm going to be able to get in free agency or what are these other teams are thinking, who's scrambling, who's doing what. I'm just going to keep with what I have and draft with the picks that I've been given.
Yeah.
So I think that when it comes to big altering changes to a team, that's going to be in the UFA. I just don't see a whole lot of trades happening regardless.
Yeah, and I think, to an extent, you're correct. I think there's going to be one or two teams that are going to look to make a big splash at the draft, because there always is every year. There's always one big move, if not two, where this player who's making X amount of money on the higher end of the spectrum here is, dealt for this or this or this, whatever it may be.
But if there's a cut to the cap, man, nobody's going to – think about it now. If there's a cut to the cap, does that Nashville PK Subban trade happen?
Absolutely
do
not.
You find – right. So, one team might be looking to make a splash, but that doesn't mean that other teams are going to be willing to take on that cap, because everybody's going to be affected by this.
But we also revert back to when the Flyers were able to trade Chris Pronger's dead contract. It was essentially dead money, but Arizona had to meet the cap floor. So if there is a team that needs to meet the cap floor, which a team like Ottawa comes to mind, maybe Detroit, I don't know, your top teams in the draft.
Right.
It's plausible, but at the same
depends
rate,
on what the floor is.
You're right. The floor, I don't know. It's $60 million, I think, but right now.
Right. And it's so hard to project what it's going to be because I don't think either of us could realistically predict what the salary cap's going to be.
No.
There's too many what ifs.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Absolutely.
I mean, I think that, for the sake of this conversation, it's even like it wouldn't benefit either of our arguments because we just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think that if there are cap cuts, if you're lowering the cap, then fewer teams, like you're going to have a harder time finding a partner, even if you want to make a deal. Like, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
No, you're right. It's a matter of what the cap's going to be at. If there is a big cut, who knows? Not many teams are going to be too receptive to taking on big deals like last year with Vancouver and Tampa. If the cap doesn't change, maybe we see those deals. Who knows?
I still know how we changed that problem, my friend. My initial plan a few episodes back. Get rid of the cap.
Yep. If we could just have Mike on to tell us how that folded out. So
yeah, 2 years.
All right, so I'm not changing your mind. You're not changing mine. This is a great idea to have.
I kind of did. You agreed with me a lot more than I agreed with you.
No, here's the thing. I can agree with you on these things, and I see where you were coming from. I don't necessarily think that holding the draft before play has ended is a good idea, and I stand by that. But there's a difference between having my opinion swayed and being able to say, hey, this is a logical choice. Like, I get the logic behind what you've explained to me, and I say I agree with it, but that doesn't necessarily mean you've changed my mind.
So I have a question for you.
Okay.
When is the cutoff point? Like, when does the season need for you to start in order for us to have the draft at the end of it all? Like, is it regardless? Like, say hockey picks up back in August. Are you still cool with having the draft after the fact?
See, that's tough because you think about it. There's such out of all the players that are drafted, you have 7 rounds and you've got 31 picks plus compensatory picks. So you've got about, 200 to 250 players, let's say. Out of those 250 players that have been drafted, probably you want to say 15 to 20 of them are going to be on the roster for the first day next season. I mean, that's a logical number, correct?
Yeah, I guess so.
About that. So it's going to only affect a small percentage of the players that are being drafted if it's all jammed, let's say they want to keep the regular start date at the beginning of October, but the draft is, September 26th, and they've got literally 1 week to get these players ready. That's a difficult swing. I just, to tell you the truth, I don't have an answer for that.
That's fine.
It's a difficult one. It's one of those things you just don't know until you're presented with that opportunity or that, problem, you could call it.
I mean, I'd also say that if we go that long, they should just scrap the whole year. I mean, if it's August and we haven't started playing yet, it's time to just cut our losses.
Yeah, I think you're right there. We're in very interesting times, and no one knows how this is all going to fold out. But let's say it does happen, and the season gets played out. We have somebody that wins the Stanley Cup.
Yep.
When you look back on this 5, 10, 15, 30, 40, 50 years from now, are you going to look at this season and let's say it's, let's say the Flyers win the Cup. Are you going to look back on it unbiased, putting your bias towards the Flyers aside? Are you going to look back on this and say that this is a tainted Stanley Cup victory for the Flyers?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to put my bias to the side because I think people would listen to this and go, you're full of it. From a fan perspective, I don't care when the cup is held. If the Flyers win the Stanley Cup, I will be ecstatic.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm with you there.
So that is as a fan. But when we're talking about unbiased, just from a full league perspective, everybody else looking at it outside of the fans, how do you not look at this year's Stanley Cup winner differently? Okay, we're talking about months where they just stopped playing. every streak that had been happening no longer matters. The Flyers hot, playing doesn't matter anymore. Okay. You have so many of these people who haven't been on the ice. It is like a brand new condensed season. It's completely different. You can't really connect it to what has already happened at this point.
Oh, it's been far too long.
So, it's not the same, and I hear this, well, the 2013 Chicago Blackhawks Stanley Cup doesn't have an asterisk. Well, let me tell you something. That was a lockout shortened year, correct? So once they started playing, they kept playing, right? That is completely different. That is one idiot reading someone else's tweet trying to find an argument to be like, well, it's still going to matter because we don't want our team's Stanley Cup to be tainted by the rest of the league. And then they're like, oh, well, I'm just going to use that. It's not the same thing. It is far from the same thing.
Now, this presents an interesting argument for me here. You look at it and you said that amongst the league. I want to talk about fans in general. I don't care whether it's Nashville fans, Dallas fans, Colorado, Chicago, whatever. If you're a fan of the game itself, are you viewing it as a tainted Stanley Cup win if your team or another team even hoists the Stanley Cup this season?
Well, I think your natural reaction as a fan is if it's any team but yours, you're certainly going to use that.
Of course, especially a rival team.
Yeah, I mean, I think any team. You could the first argument made by anybody who's not connected with that organization is going to be, well, look at where they were when the season ended. And so come on. I mean, I don't really think that really counts. And that's why the fan aspect of it is so skewed, because it's like you're going to have whoever's team wins the Stanley Cup is going to be ecstatic regardless, and everybody else is going to be like, well, it's not the same thing.
Yeah. And Flyers fans are just going to be like, you know what? F you. Don't care. We won the cup. Kiss it. Kiss my butt. But we talked about fans, players. Again, Flyers hoist the Stanley Cup. The first interview that Sidney Crosby has with the media, and they ask him, do you think that this is a tainted Stanley Cup? What do you think Crosby's going to say?
Well, we're talking about hockey players, and hockey players always have the safe answer.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. But unfiltered. It doesn't even have to be Crosby. It could be anybody along the league.
Again, I think anybody besides for the people who won the Stanley Cup are going to think that it's different.
Do you think there's a player on the Flyers, if they win the Cup, that would come out and say it doesn't feel right?
Only players who have won one before. So I could see like Niskanen, in a very intimate conversation with somebody he knows wouldn't leak it, being like, didn't quite feel the same as when I won it with Washington.
He wouldn't tell that to, a Dave Isaac or a Sam Carchidi, but, his buddies around the campfire in the middle of the summer, he'd be like, yeah, this didn't feel like the one I won in Washington or the ones I won in Pittsburgh.
And the thing is, man, like, it's just one of those things where it's like, if we decide to do it, that's great. If we decide to have the playoffs, like, I think that would be fantastic to have hockey in the summer. And when you have a team who wins the Stanley Cup, that's amazing.
Yeah.
But it's different. It's going to be different. It's going to be the year that the season was put on pause.
Yeah.
But the same thing will be if the NBA resumes or, those are the two that were in the middle of it all.
Of course.
I think the MLS might have started, if that counts.
Yeah.
Maybe NASCAR. I don't know. But, so I think that, like, it's still going to be special, but it is not going to be the same thing as the traditional winner of the Stanley Cup.
You're right. I think that, you can't discount the teams that made the playoffs and what they did to put themselves into a position to get there. You can't discount that because they earned the right to be in the playoffs. But the fact that there's 13, 14, however many games remaining for each team, you're always going to look at that and say, how would the rest of the season unfolded had those games been played?
And I think that that argument where it's like, oh, it would have been the same thing as for those teams that would be like your 7th or 8th seed, those wild card teams. If it was a top team, say Boston, and they won the Stanley Cup, I think more people would go, oh, well, they had a good chance of winning it anyway.
Yeah.
But
if it's
for
a
a
lower
team like
team,
Philly, like a streaky team like Philly, if they won the Cup, I could see everybody being like, well, it was a fluke.
Oh, yeah, but you know exactly the reaction you'd get from Philadelphia fans. Yeah,
Yep.
Middle fingers ablazing, looking like Mr. Bean out of the back of that convertible. So, real quick, I wanted to get to this poll that we ran earlier this week, too. We talked about, holding the draft in June, and we posed it as a poll, whether it would be a good idea or a bad idea. We had 103 votes, and 71% of the 103 people who voted in this poll said that holding the draft in June would be a bad idea. I should correct myself here. Holding the NHL draft before the end of the playoffs. I didn't specify June or that. I said before the end of the playoffs. So, I see it and I get it because I'm of that same mindset. I do understand where you're coming from because in a season of so many abnormalities, you kind of have to adapt and adopt the strange, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, and not to get too psychology on us, but I think that when it comes to giving an initial opinion about something like this, or in anything you do, pointing out all the negatives or why it would go wrong is so much easier.
Oh, absolutely, and that's why I picked that side of the discussion.
Right, you're in the middle of wiping Sully's rear end, and you're just like, well, come on, the clear answer is.
Yeah, I just got done debating Mark Allred about whether the Flyers or the Bruins should win the Stanley Cup. I wanted the easy side this time.
Yeah, listen, man, and I know we're running kind of, high on time here, but I think that people just need to take all tradition and all normal and throw it in the trash, and not just with hockey, but with the entire world right now. This is a point where you're going to have to be flexible. When things start to look a little bit normal, you can't get pissed that it's not what your life was before all this happened. The people who are going back to work might demand more than what you originally were asking. And you have every right to be pissed, but you kind of have to just put it to the side because the world's going to be different for a little while.
Yeah. You just got to adapt.
My fireside chat.
Yeah.
Gove Bob 2020.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Again, let me do my finest Al Gore impression. I demand a recount. That wasn't Al Gore. Who was that?
Was it Al Gore? No, was it Bush?
No, it wasn't Bush. It was John Kerry.
I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? I'm not a big politics guy.
Well, the recount, the president election where it did change was Gore and Bush.
Okay.
Remember, because Gore won the popular vote, but Florida screwed it up or something ridiculous.
Yeah, I was young, and to tell you the truth, I'm not even going to say I wasn't into politics then because really I'm still not into politics. I'm just into making fun of people.
What's it, Ben
yes,
Molesky.
We need our political
scientist.
Guy? Yes. I'm sure if he's listening to this, we will hear about it on Twitter in the next day or so if he's still listening. But folks, this has been it. We wanted to touch on the draft. We wanted to touch on how it would all unfold. We did, and now John is going to tell you where you'll be able to find us. If you can still hear me. There we go.
First of all, yeah, you were a little choppy. First of all, I hope that your mic lasted for this one, my friend.
Oh, it did. It did. I promise.
Because I can't redo this one. There's no way I can redo this.
No redo. We're good.
All right. So you can find us. What am I doing again? Oh, yeah. You can find us on Twitter at PodSTBullies. You can find our lovely podcast on your various podcast thingamabobs. They're iTunes, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and my favorite, Pod Muncher.
There it is.
I've actually just recently got into talks with the fine people at Podmuncher. Believe it or not, none of them were wearing pants. And they said for the next 6 weeks, you could subscribe to Podmuncher without any extra information. So for my young folk like my good man Hoagie, now's your time, baby. Get on there. And that's all I got for you.
This is why I despise you sometimes. Just sometimes. But
I didn't sing this whole episode.
It's not over yet, but I'm playing the outro music right now, so you can't. Anyways, you can find John on Twitter at PodStreetGove. You can find myself on Twitter at PodStreetBob.
You may hate me, but it ain't no lie.
Son of a bitch. We almost made it.
Bye,
We almost made it. Regardless,
I want to tell you that I had
log on to Apple Podcasts, leave us
crazy.
a review. Let us know how much you love us, because let's be honest, we know you do. And as always, I will leave you with, let's go Flyers.
'Cause it ain't no lie, baby. Bye, 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 bye.